This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Think Red Bull graduate and many names will come to mind, from Jean-Eric Vergne to Carlos Sainz, the two Daniels, not to mention the 6 and counting world titles of Sebastian Vettel and Max Verstappen. But there is one name who is often forgotten. If it wasn't for some trademark Red Bull-esque shuffling, he could still be on the grid today. We are talking about Jaime Alguersuari, the youngest driver to ever start an F1 race on his debut in 2009, a fledgling career with huge potential, cut short after just 2 seasons, and he would never return. Jaime recently made an appearance on the Squarespace F1 podcast and gave some fascinating insight into his journey as a Red Bull junior. So today I want to take a deeper dive into his often overlooked F1 career. What could have been from the young man from Barcelona? Let's talk about it. When Jaime made his Formula 1 debut at the 2009 Hungarian Grand Prix, he was just 19 years and 125 days old, undercutting Fernando Alonso's 2001 debut by just 93 days. A record that stood the test of time until Max Verstappen, of course, made his debut at the Australian Grand Prix 2015 when he was just 17. Today in 2023, that makes Jaime 33 years of age, so think of him in the same generation as your Daniel Ricciardo's, Valtteri Bottas, Checo Perez. Prior to stepping into full-scale F1 machinery, Jaime's big open-wheel career highlight was his 2008 British F3 title, snatched at the double-round finale at Donington against a grid of some pretty established motorsport names. Former Formula E driver Oliver Turvey, current Le Mans and ex-Toro Rosso driver Brendan Hartley, Red Bull's very own Checo Perez, and the 2022 Indy 500 winner Marcus Ericsson. That was in 2008. His 2009 year started okay, not exceptionally. He was competing in Formula Renault 3.5, and after 11 of 17 rounds he was sitting 8th in the championship, but then all of a sudden his world would turn upside down. Alguersuari started 2009 as Red Bull and Toro Rosso reserve, replacing Brendan Hartley, who had the title the year prior. And then on the 16th of July 2009, just 10 days before Jaime was scheduled to race in round 10 of his Formula Renault 3.5 championship, it was announced that Sebastian Bourdais was being dropped from Toro Rosso. To quote team principal Franz Tost, "It's Sebastian's second year with us. The partnership has not met our expectations. Therefore, we have decided to replace him as from the next round of the World Championship, the Hungarian Grand Prix." The 30-year-old had been firmly outshone by much younger teammate Sebastian Vettel in 2008 and the Sebastian Buemi in that 2009 season. So this couldn't have come as too much of a surprise to Bourdais, but all of a sudden Alguersuari was in the big leagues. Yet, getting that F1 call didn't stop him juggling the remaining 8 F1 races of that season, 2009, with finishing his Formula Renault 3.5 championship and finishing 6th overall. Like, imagine trying to juggle that these days. That just wouldn't happen.
They dropped him mid-season and they called me to replace him in the middle of the season, which was completely crazy. But I coped the best I could.
Well, I'll tell you another thing you wouldn't have seen back in 2009 is the ability to build your own beautiful online home, beautiful website, no coding knowledge needed, thousands of beautiful drag and drop templates with today's video sponsor, Squarespace. Websites back in 2009 were not very pleasant, but don't you worry, Squarespace has got you. They've recently introduced Fluid Engine that gives you even more flexibility, creative control to bring your beautiful website dreams to life, whether that's a blog, whether that's a shop, whether that's a portfolio like I use my Squarespace website. Free to try, so there's nothing to lose. It's only when you want to put your finished website live to the world you have to pay anything. When the time inevitably comes around, head to squarespace.com/TommoF1 to get 10% off your first website or domain. Now, there were a few drivers pretty unhappy with Jaime getting the call up because of how young he was, but more so because of how inexperienced he was. Jaime hadn't done a single kilometre of actual track time in an actual Formula 1 car. He'd only done some straight line stop-start stuff at Faenza. You'd have thought Helmut would have at least given him a day or two of testing, knowing that Bourdais' days were numbered, like they chose to get rid of Bourdais. Button, Webber and Hamilton all expressed reservations, but it was Felipe Massa actually who really went in on it. For me, he's too young. He's never driven a Formula 1 car, or he has driven it in a straight line or whatever. For me, it's wrong. It's not good for him. He can burn himself very quickly. I mean, you can't really argue with it. Plum last in his debut qualifying session about 8 tenths off of the back of Buemi. Jaime kept it clean in his first Grand Prix and actually finished ahead of Sebastian, who had a spin. P15 on debut. Zero F1 experience beforehand, and this was in the days of pretty much unlimited testing as well, so there was no excuse to not give him some testing. European Grand Prix next in Valencia, second off Buemi in qualifying, but he did once again finish the full race distance Unfortunately, this then was followed by 4 races in a row of DNFs. Lap 1 incident with Hamilton in Spa ended his race. His gearbox failed him in Monza, then both Toro Rossos had technical failures on the same lap at the Singapore Grand Prix. And in Suzuka, Jaime binned it on the Astro runoff at 130R. Brazil was another full race distance, he got to Q2 as well. Good experience under the helmet, but then the Abu Dhabi season finale, gearbox issues once again saw to the end of that. It was certainly a baptism of fire, again juggling all those F1 races with Formula Renault 3.5 as well. It was always going to be very difficult to make any judgment calls on Jaime until year 2, so let's talk about 2010. That Toro Rosso was clearly quicker than the Team Lotus, the HRT and the Virgin backmarkers, but clearly slower than the BMW, the Force India, the Williams. Both Alguersuari and Buemi would struggle to finish in the points most of the time. 4 times for Buemi all season, 3 times for Jaime. Round 2, Malaysian Grand Prix, was Jaime's first taste of F1 points, and he was the second youngest in history at the time behind Sebastian Vettel to score points in Formula 1. P14 to P9, a really solid drive for Jaime, 2 positions clear of Buemi as well. Round 5 was his home Grand Prix in Catalonia. He's actually from Barcelona as well, so it's actually his home Grand Prix. It wasn't lining up anything special particularly, but it was a bit of a race of attrition. There were a ton of DNFs this race. I mean, Lewis had a massive tyre blowout on the penultimate lap and still was classified as 14th. So a single point for Jaime, P10, not a huge amount to write home about. There was a lot of fortuity there. But again, another full race distance under his helmet, so it's not a bad thing. And finally, there was the 2010 season finale in Abu Dhabi. We're going to take a bit of time talking about this because there are many stories that went on. As we all know, the 2010 season finale at Abu Dhabi was an all-timer in terms of championship battle. But Jaime played his part. Qualifying was a bit of a mess. Jaime was starting P17 in the end, but was able to recover all the way to P9. Now, what role did he play in the championship fight? Well, he did briefly hold up Mark Webber, his not teammate, but kind of teammate. And just as Rob Smedley had dropped this absolute bar a matter of races earlier at Hockenheim,
Fernando is faster than you. Can you confirm you understood that message?
Jaime was told by his race engineer,
Webber is faster than you, Jaime. Webber is faster than you.
Helps having 2 teams on the grid. Hey, that was very egregious. That would not fly today, even though, you know, Yuki and Daniel know what's up. Just saying. But on top of all that, and something I had no idea, I didn't know this was a thing before I researched this video, but according to Adrian Newey, Jaime holding up Mark when he did could have actually ended up playing a pivotal role in Sebastian winning that championship. The irony was that had Alguersuari not held Mark up, then Ferrari probably would not have bothered covering because it was too late. It is only because Mark got held up that we were able to go for the cover, so actually Toro Rosso did us a real favour, rather unwittingly I suspect. Jaime also ended up doing to Massa what Petrov did to Alonso. Jaime held up the Brazilian all race. Felipe could not get past him. Rob was giving him stick, trying to get him to get the move done, but he couldn't do it. So Massa finished P10, Alguersuari P9. But also the 3 races prior to that Abu Dhabi finale were all P11, so just outside the points. His Australian P11 drive was a standout one as well, holding Michael Schumacher in his Mercedes back for most of the race. Jaime completed the 4th most laps overall of any driver in 2010, and only 2 retirements all year in Britain and Hungary, which were both mechanical failures, so Jaime kept it super clean. Progress was clearly getting made, and expectations were rightfully high for 2011. In the recent words of Franz Tost, if a rookie is coming to Formula 1, they need minimum 3 years to understand what's going on here. 2011 was that 3rd and final year for Jaime. It was time to shine. And if you ask me, he did a pretty good job. Now, it did take a while to get going. There were new tyre compounds for 2011, new Pirellis. You also had DRS being introduced for the first time. Obviously, everyone's got to get on top of it, but he is only in his second full season. Jaime couldn't manage a point in the first 6 races, whereas his teammate Sebastian scored in 3 different races of those first 6. But Jaime would follow that up with 5 point scoring finishes in the next 7 races and 7 point scoring finishes in total for that season. P7s in Monza and Korea were the highlights, ending the season on 26 points, 11 ahead of Buemi. Jaime's average qualifying position was fractionally clear of Buemi's a P6 start, the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa was a big highlight. Now, as much as I mentioned P7 career was a highlight result for Jaime Alguersuari, he did come to blows quite publicly. We don't often see this. With Helmut Marko after he'd obstructed his teammate Sebastian Vettel in the Red Bull on Saturday practice.
He was coming behind you. I saw, but I cannot tell you every single lap. Not every single lap. He did 2 attempts, and we don't know where in the middle of the sector if we are quick or not quick or not. No. It wasn't 5 times. It was one in the first corner of his first lap, then you slowed down, and the next 2 laps you were always in his way. But obviously in the way. No, that's not exactly front is talking.
But surely that was just a bit of bickering, right? And that's that. Surely a P7 finish from that race that close to the end of the season, and such a strong end to the season in such a small team with a small budget, surely his position at that team was consolidated for the future, right? Right? Wrong. In just a 1-minute phone call, everything came to an end, an abrupt end for Jaime Alguersuari in Formula 1. On the 18th of December 2011, just a week before Christmas. It's not very Christmassy, is it? And after a Toro Rosso press event in Spain, talking about 2012 and promoting it all, right? Franz Tost phoned up Jaime Alguersuari and informed him he would not be part of the team in 2012. Seemingly completely out of nowhere, Jaime was not expecting it.
One day after, they called me and they just dropped me in a 1-minute phone call. If there was someone to drop, there was like someone who lost the battle, from the teammates.
What makes this an added killer though? Oh mate, when he said this in that podcast, I was like, bruv, that's so peak. Just 1 month prior to getting dropped, he'd been offered a contract by another team, the Renault Lotus team, the good Lotus team. Eric Boullier had tried to sign him and he said no because he felt confident, he felt comfortable, he thought he was doing a good job, he thought he had a shot at the top Red Bull seat, he thought he was safe. But it was anything but.
And the biggest mistake was me not signing with Lotus and leaving Red Bull. But what are you going to expect? Like, you're consistently beating your teammates all the time, consistently in the top 10.
Lotus Renault ended up running Grosjean and Raikkonen in 2012. And given that they announced both of those drivers coming into that team after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, a good couple of weeks after, we can't say for sure who Jaime was being lined up to race alongside. I reckon probably Raikkonen, the bigger profile name coming back from Rally. Grosjean had made his debut at Renault, but the proof wasn't in the pudding. He certainly wasn't the consistent driver that Jaime had demonstrated. And given that Lotus Renault finished the 2012 season P4 in the Constructors, close to P3 as well, Kimi finished P3 in the Championship. Oh man. But what's also interesting is that Jaime now doesn't believe it was actually Helmut Marko who pulled the plug. He thinks it goes further than that.
This was coming from the very top. And I'm not even saying Helmut Marko. It was just definitely coming from somewhere else because I know Helmut would have not dropped me.
Their excuse, they're very good drivers, but they're not winning drivers, which, I mean, you're in a Toro Rosso. I know Vettel won in a Toro Rosso, right, in exceptional circumstances, but come on, that seems like a bit of a cop-out to me. When you look at the two who replaced both Alguersuari and Buemi, Daniel Ricciardo, Jean-Eric Vergne, both had performed well in Formula Renault 3.5 the year prior, and Daniel had finished that 2011 season racing in Formula 1 for the backmarkers HRT. What do you think? I mean, swapping both drivers out, maybe they just was like, oh, we're not feeling particularly inspired by these two, and I think wrongly. I think Buemi had done a good job as well, but then you look at the resources available to Toro Rosso at the time, for them to even get in the points, you could argue is a bit of a statement. I don't know, I mean, out of all 4 of those drivers, Jaime's the only one who no longer races. Obviously Jev and Buemi have had fantastic careers in Formula E, and obviously Daniel Ricciardo's done bits in Formula 1. Let me know your theories in the comments below. For me, the most likely is, we just want to tear it off and just start from scratch, because neither of these are looking like the next Sebastian Vettel. Maybe Seb's quality overinflated their expectations. I don't know. So what about life after F1? Because in 2012 and 13, Jaime earned a living as a Pirelli test driver before a pretty unsuccessful period in German GT racing for 2014. Then an opportunity presented itself to race in the inaugural Formula E season 2014-15. He snapped it up, but didn't do the best job, unfortunately, racing for Virgin alongside Sam Bird. Sam won and P3'd in those first 2 races, Jaime finishing 9th and 11th respectively. He would see the season out, missing the last 2 events through illness, but he would only score 30 points in the end, finishing P13, whereas Bird, he won twice all year, finished P5 in the standings. You got to beat your teammate first and foremost, and Jaime had not done that. So then a few months after the Formula E season had ended on the 1st of October 2015, at 25 years of age, Jaime Alguersuari announced his retirement, full stop, from motorsport. Speaking in 2021 as to why he left when he left, really interesting insight. It was a time when I felt anger and rejection towards Formula One, towards Helmut Marko, towards Red Bull, towards everything that had happened. I tried to work in Formula One for Movistar as a commentator, but as soon as we went back to the track, I was sick. I wasn't happy to be there. It wasn't my place at that moment. After all, I was only 23 years old. I can imagine, right, at that young age to have been dropped from Formula One to then go into Formula E and be beaten by your teammate as well. Your head's not going to be fully in Formula E because you're still holding this bitterness towards Formula One. I can imagine why that would have manifested in a pretty toxic and unhealthy way through him. Fortunately, Jaime did have a separate passion in life that he didn't just do after he left racing, he was doing throughout his time in racing. Squire is what he goes by these days, and music has been a passion, a long set passion. He's a DJ now. He does dance music with a bit of a Latin twist to it. I'm Squire, but I feel like Jaime Alguersuari again. I can walk into a Formula One paddock again and say hello to Christian Horner and Marko. I can smile. In time, you change, you mature, you gain new perspectives on life, and you learn to appreciate the failures ultimately because they build character. Jaime shows that clearly F1 drivers, there's more to them than just driving around in circles. And it's interesting actually because music seems like a really common endeavour. We're seeing a lot now. You've got Orlando likes doing a bit of DJing. You've got Charles dropping these piano bangers. You've got Lewis XNDA, Jacques Villeneuve back in the day. But the acceptance that Jaime shows in hindsight now, he seems at ease with himself, which is nice to see. Of course, I didn't have a chance at Red Bull in a more competitive car, but I started to realise that I was privileged anyway, and I have to be grateful for that. But I only realised it after a while. Today I can go into the AlphaTauri pit and hug Franz Tost. I started to see the glass half full and realised how lucky I was. What would Jaime have gone on to achieve in Formula One if he'd have just taken that Lotus Renault contract, man? Same age as Bottas and Checo, so he could have easily, you know, his career could have gone on a completely different trajectory and he could still be in F1 to this day and he could have won stuff, who knows. But back to that quote from Massa. He can burn himself very quickly. Now, whether Massa meant it in burnout context or, you know, have an accident very quickly, I'm going to assume the prior, he was kind of right, wasn't he? Like and comment down below. My name's Tommo. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-da.